Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I'm speaking with Constance Fay about her Uncharted Hearts series, of which Fiasco and Chaos are out right in. Oh no, Fiasco and Calamity. Goodness. And Chaos is out next year, March 11th, right now. So hopefully it stays March 11th. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure well, I'd say to be here, but I'm in my home. It's a pleasure to be on the call with you.
Well, your house is much cooler than mine. Like I love I don't know if that's a painting or your wallpaper and like your
It's a
bookshelf.
very carefully curated Zoom-sized chunk of my house. Like there's a reason we're not seeing the whole house.
Well, it's gorgeous anyway. Um, so can you tell me a little bit about what the Uncharted Hearts books are about?
Absolutely. So the Uncharted Hearts series is a sci-fi adventure romance series because I have difficulty choosing a genre and I love a mashup. The first book in that series, Calamity, the super short pitch is imagine Calamity Jane in space with sex. The slightly longer pitch is that it's about a main character named Temperance Reed, who goes by Temper, who's down on her luck ship captain and takes a job with one of the treacherous, like, five families that are in charge of her part of space to pay back a debt. The catch is, of course, they demand that one of their own, their oldest son, whose name is Arcadio Escajeda, join the crew as the head of security. And the two bump heads and, other things as they explore a planet that has a space cult, a clandestine military force, and a massive volcano. Fiasco, which is the sequel to Calamity, takes place in the same space with the same crew, but with a different narrator. So, and it's a sci-fi adventure romance with like just a touch of thriller because I was like, why not add a fourth? Why not add just a little bit extra? And my very short logline for that is like, what if PTSD was a woman and she fell in love, but funny? So it's about Sin Ka, who's a bounty hunter who's infamous for one like really bad decision, which led to a mass murder of bad people. And she's given the opportunity to go after the kidnapper who took and killed her cousin, but she has to team up with the crew of the Calamity, who she met previously during the adventures in Calamity. And she also has the added complication that she's given a bounty on their medic, whose name is Micah Aurora. And she never expected to have to like take her bounty home to meet her parents and have her pet, who's a metal eating flying lizard, prefer Micah to herself. But they adventure together, learn a lot more about each other, and in the end, both learn a lot of major lessons about trusting and assumptions.
So that's a lot to take in.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it was rapid fire,
ah,
rapid fire.
we'll start with Calamity, because honestly, it is a very fun book. And right from the get-go, where you start is a firefight, um, with the main character, Temper, and she is with someone other than Arcadio. And it gets a little weird for a second there. Um,
Mhm.
so that's like a really fun place to start, though. Is that where the book always started?
It always started there, but there was different. So in the draft phase, it started in the earliest draft phase, it started there, but her relationship with the captain of that time, was very, very different. And it also started a little quieter, and the action moment picked up later. And, through edits, it became very clear that we needed to start in the thick of things, and also there needed to be a bit more like oomph with the captain to explain story elements later on. So we I say we, like when I say we, I mean myself, my agent, my editors, that we, not like the imperial we, that I am the we who is making these decisions, um, updated their relationship and that scene. So it started there, but yeah, there had been through like a black hole and was something different.
Had you already pitched this book before you wrote it then?
No, this was my first published novel. So I wrote it completely, and I guess I can get in the whole story of that, but that might be too much. Um,
No,
so
that'd be okay.
okay. So prior to Calamity, I didn't have an agent either. So it was my sort of beginning of everything story. And I participated in an auction to benefit the Ukraine. And one of the prizes in that auction was that a well known author, Rebecca Zanetti, would read the first three chapters of it and would give a critique. And so I won that auction item, and she did, and very generously offered to read the whole book after she read the first three chapters, and gave me a notice that she would also let her agent know to like look for me when I was ready to query. So based on her feedback, I tweaked a few things, which was adding some of the action to the early scenes, that sort of thing. Then based on my eventual agent, Caitlin Blaisdell's response, we did a little bit more, and then we submitted to Bramble before there was a Bramble, like in the pre-Bramble era, and then they also obviously had things. So it was a committee book, but it wasn't a proposal beforehand. It was completely written prior to that, which is my very long answer for that. But I like to give a timeline, you know?
No, that works because then it gives me a good idea of like how maybe you came about writing things and how things might have shifted over time. Um, which I always love to think about because you have a very complex political structure with the five different families, and I can't imagine keeping track of all of this. Um, did you get help from them in this as well, or was this all you?
No, I mean, I'm always terrified to say something was all me because I feel like I'm going to forget that at some point someone gave me critical advice. But to my knowledge, at my recollection at this time, that part was predominantly me. You know, they might have asked me to clarify some things or make the structure more clear. But I have been a prodigious reader and watcher of sci-fi type things. And so I think that the political structure is, while it is complicated, it's something that we see sort of in a lot of series, and just like I cherry picked, you know, bits and pieces and combined them into something that's hopefully new.
It felt very fresh to me, but it also like I could feel like maybe some Galactic Battlestar references with some of the political characters. Maybe that's just me though, like projecting.
I mean, that was one of my favorite shows, so I'm sure it seeped in there, you know, that it is it, it it wasn't an overt thing, but I, like I said, there's a lot going on in the sci-fi stew of my brain that, yeah.
So you do a really interesting thing is you almost completely uh focus on just Temper and her crew. Um, so you don't really go into the thick of the like world building immediately.
Mhm.
Um, I guess how do you know how much is too much world building and when to do it? And like,
I think at the minute it starts getting boring, right? That for an author, probably most of the world building is fascinating, right? Because we spend all this time planning it ahead of time. But for my stories, at least, the story really is the story of the arc of the characters, right? And so the world building is important as it touches on those character arcs, but it's not, you know, much like the rest of us, like some people are very, very into politics. Some people are less into politics. Some people are into politics about very specific issues and not so much about other issues. And because mine are told in a first person present tense, it really is like, how much does the narrator care about this thing at this time? And so it would come up as it would hopefully sort of naturally come up in the real world. Like you might not be thinking about something until you get to the grocery store and something's really expensive, or you might not be thinking about something until like it impacts your real life, and then you think about the world that is around you. But I think that's what I try to do for keeping it realistic and hopefully not like a data dump is happening about the world we imagine that they live in.
I think the only relatively unrealistic part is how sweet and wonderful Temper is, considering the family she came from. Um, yeah.
Yeah, she's a black sheep of a different kind, you know? So sometimes bad people create good children.
So that her family is quite a bit of tension, right? So her brother, and he's off screen for most of the book, which helps build that tension in my mind. Because he's like the evil big bad.
Hmm.
But that's not the only thing going on. There's like so much. They have to go to a planet to find some mineral, but it's not about the mineral. There's
Hmm.
secrets, there's a cult. How
Yeah.
did you mix all of these things together, I guess?
Well, I mean, as you can tell from my aesthetic back here, I am a maximalist. I like a lot. And I received a piece of what I deemed good advice from Rebecca Zanetti. I believe it was from her, which was that like don't hold back a good idea for a future. Like some ideas are a full book, and obviously you would hold them back. But in general, if you get a fun idea, like don't hold it back if you find a way to fit it into what you're doing, because there will always be new ideas. And what you don't want is the thing that you're doing to feel unfilled out or unfully dimensional. And so I had a lot, as you mentioned, ideas. And there were some things that, you know, this series, it's sort of in the titles. You've got Calamity and Fiasco and Chaos, and they are sort of about an abundance of stuff happening. You know, a calamity is too much. A fiasco is often too much. Chaos is certainly too much. And so I do like to take everything but the kitchen sink and maybe even a sink and throw it at the characters and just see how they react to it.
I I want to say, like, was the cult already in it at the beginning, or did you add it later?
Yeah. Yeah, the cult was in there from a minute because I'm a true crime buff. I love true crime, and my favorite elements of true crime are cults because like the and I didn't this was it's not like we were in the cult, you know, we were peripheral to the cult most of the time, but I had to throw in a cult element because I find the mindset of people that get in them, the mindset of people who lead them really fascinating. And I spent an unrealistic amount of time listening to Jim Jones sermons to try to get like cult speech correct, to get that, you know, the kind of impassioned public speaking that it's a little wrong, but it just sort of glides over you and you don't notice it's wrong until like 10 words later that so that was one of those times when your hobby feeds into your work.
I would say hobbies should feed into like this kind of work, right? They're the things you
Hmm.
know the best, it seems.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of my favorite things with the cult leader is he practices his monologues. Oh my God, that's so beautiful because it's got to be true, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, they have to have that, you know, in front of the mirror after the shower moment when they're like, all right, what's the right word? What's the word that'll be, or just the emphasis on, I think so. I think that the thing with a cult leader in general is that there's nothing genuine about them at all. So like there is no off the cuff comment, that everything I think is created for that image.
Yeah. I there's like so much to think about with this part of the book. Um, and one of the parts is they're on this secret mission to this planet, trying to hide it from the other families because territorial disputes, right? So even in space, we have big corporations and territories.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like so human nature to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sad, but I also think it's something that is sort of inherently human that even as we evolve in some ways, I'm not sure if that sort of avariciousness and competition goes away completely, especially out of those who get power, because, once you get power, you just want more of it, and there's different ways to get more of it, and that's one of the obvious ones.
Yeah. So a lot of times when I'm reading um like amateur writers, I'll find that they have a tendency to not fill out their world, to not really populate this universe. But you did not have this problem. You have so many great characters, like the dragon family that you eventually see. You have personalities for all of these little minions that are running around for them. And it's wonderful to see like a full and bustling society, even on this like desolate planet.
Mhm.
Um, it, like, did you ever struggle with trying like was there's too many characters, there's not enough, like
I really enjoy writing scenes with a lot of characters in it. I don't do it that much because it can be confusing, just from
yeah,
a writing standpoint. And then because I also try to consider audiobook narration, from the narration standpoint to make sure that everything is clear about what's happening. So that has probably limited my huge ensemble scenes. Um, but I really enjoy them. One of my favorite scenes ever to write was the family dinner in Fiasco with just everyone going off in different directions. And so I like the having a lot of characters and a lot of things going on like that. But I don't, I'm trying to think if there was an instance where I was like, I need to add someone else here to liven it up, or I think there are a couple situations where in an early draft, someone is in the room that really didn't need to be, that
yeah.
they were there for like from a previous scene, and they were just sort of there. And, you're imagining this like impassioned conversation happening in the helm, and like Itzel's standing in the corner just staring at something. And so that was usually edited out, but never when everyone was actively participating to say like, it's too much or too little.
Okay. Um, that kind of leads into Fiasco. That's the second one. I don't know why I'm having trouble with Calamity and Fiasco.
Well, I
Um,
mean, it does seem like a fiasco might come before a calamity if you're talking, about something that happened at home, like, this was such a fiasco, and then it led to, so I could see it.
okay, yeah, thank you for saving me. So Fiasco follows Sin, um, who we do briefly meet in Calamity, but you have to read that one to find the funness,
Mhm,
for yourself. I'm not going to tell you who she is. Um, but she lives on a very different type of world. So far in Calamity, it's all very techy. There's a lot
mhm,
of technology, there's a lot of political rivalry, and then we go to this very small planet with like such close-knit communities.
mhm.
Was it's got to be a strange jump from like all of these awful families to like everybody just wants to take care of one another.
Yeah, they do, but I think that it's sort of a similar story, right? That I feel like it's not a secret that I'm poking fingers at like large corporations and what they do, right? And so I don't think I need to be cagey about that here. But you have, again, it's sort of the individual perspective that that's still happening in Sin's world, right? She's just, her world is under the more explicit control of one of these families, so it doesn't get as much like Temper's out everywhere, kind of encountering everyone. And because of her former, like more elevated status, she has more of a bird's eye view of that world. And so diving deeper into it and sort of the everyday life, which is maybe not as driven by that as the Tempers of the world would think, but as it turns out, actually is very heavily influenced by machinations that they don't know about. What was fun because, like, to your point, it's not all about that, but it still is, just in, tinier ways. But it allowed, I mean, for one thing, I got to show a family that was actually, like, doing okay, which after Calamity, I thought people would think that, I had a terrible home life and was writing about awful people, and so I was happy to do sort of a mixture of found family and real family in that one and focus on what was both a smaller story and a bigger story in different ways.
Yeah. So her story is someone she cares about gets murdered by a kidnapper who like ransoms wealthy children.
Mhm.
And so her whole life has been consumed by this, which I feel like is such a real thing. I couldn't imagine like I'd probably become a vigilante.
Mhm.
So it definitely feels real. Uh, and then there's this wonderful tension with her family because of it. That it was awkward reading because it was such an awkward moment.
Mhm.
And I felt everything Sin felt.
Yeah, again, we maybe haven't been to that exact family dinner
Yeah.
because that's very specific. But I think everyone has had a dinner with, it could be like work colleagues but someone that they're somewhat close to that is just like not going the way they wanted it to go. They see everything that's coming for them. They see all the pitfalls that are about to hit them before they do, and they're just like helpless to resist it. It's just sort of like, I'm just going to lay still and hope that I survive.
It reminds me a lot of like Thanksgiving with your weird political uncle that never stops.
Yeah, exactly. That maybe even your weird political uncle is like coming from a good place in a weird way,
Yeah.
but like it's there's no response to what he's saying. And so yeah, it's a little bit of that. It was actually inspired a little bit by one of my favorite rom-coms of the back in the day is While You Were Sleeping. And there's a like family dinner scene where literally everyone is talking about different things at different times. And I like that idea of sort of the big family scene that shows how much everyone knows each other and has these little sub relationships, except I added emotional landmines in it, just for fun.
That you did. I was not sure whether or not I was gonna like her family, and it was like a mixed bag by the end.
Mhm.
Um, but her parents are really interesting because they really wanted her to stay there and have babies. And so I feel like a lot of the book is about expectation and like disappointing your family in different ways.
Mhm.
Um, which is kind of what the first one was about as well, but in a much different way.
Right. I think the second one is also, what happens when you make assumptions, because she had a lot of assumptions about what her family wanted for her and who they were as people. And so I think a lot of her interpretation, especially earlier in the book, but even as it goes on, is based on her assumptions of what they want that may or may not be true, and their expectations of her are based on their assumptions of who she would be and what would make her happy based on what they know, because they've always known this place and this thing and this lifestyle. And so to them, like, obviously it's sort of the small town thing, right?
Yeah.
That why would you ever want to leave our small town where we have everything and we know everyone and it's great? And honestly, sometimes leaving the small town is bad. Like sometimes leaving the small town is not the best because you find out you're lonely and you find out that you don't, like being out in the big bad world. But sometimes you go out there and you find a place for yourself there. So it is similar, but I think it's coming from different expectations and assumptions in Fiasco.
I also think that Sin has an assumption about herself that she is inherently lonely.
Mhm.
But she has all of these people around her that care deeply for her. Um, it's just like the ability to let people in at a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. I think she's sort of what happens if like the strong female character in the story was real, where she's bought
Yeah.
into a lot of the all right, I'm a lone wolf. I'm out here lone wolfing. And it's maybe not entirely accurate. And again, with the trauma from her many past experiences, I think that plays into it too, that I again going for not direct references, but references of a sort, one of my very favorite TV shows is Farscape, which I would consider a 4-season arc of like what PTSD does to a person in space. And so I loved in that show that there are consequences, right? That you do these things, but there are always repercussions, even if they aren't in the big world, but repercussions in you. And so I wanted to have a character that really had suffered for the decisions she'd made and what she'd been through.
She, well, Temper more than her, but I definitely feel Aaron's son and in these women, this
Mhm.
very strong woman. And I love on your website you have a little saying, and it's no damsels, but lots of distress.
Yes.
And that really does fit. And I love it in this sci-fi setting. Um, Before we get too far from Farscape, I named my dogs Dargo and Moya.
Amazing.
So,
That
so I
is,
love,
I have a little pause video for a second because it's in the
yes.
same room. I'll be right back. All right. I'm back and I have brought with me my little plushy 1812 DRD
I'm
that just
jelly.
lives on my sofa.
I've seen those before and like they look comfy, but also not comfy because the eye stalks.
Yeah, it's really soft. It's
Okay.
the only thing, if you have two dogs, I imagine this would be the perfect dog toy, and I don't know that it would be safe for that.
They don't
Like,
like stuffed animals, thankfully, because I have all these like pillows that are like the Squishmallow pillows, but they
mhm.
like them as pillows, so
Oh, good. Yeah.
they won't destroy them. Um, so back from distraction. I'm sorry.
No, no, I love a fart. Sorry, I'm going to continue the
That's
distraction
okay.
actually for just a moment. Did you ever watch Community?
I watched a little bit at the very beginning, but not very
Okay.
much.
It not really necessary. There's this one episode where Abed goes on a date with someone that he doesn't want to date just because that person wants to talk about Farscape. And he's like, no, I knew you were hitting on me and I'm not into it, but you wanted like I really love Farscape. And that's me. Like I would talk about it to anyone at any time
Pretty
and
much.
have with strangers, like at the grocery store, like, hey,
Do you remember this almost 20-year-old show now that got canceled after 4 seasons?
exactly, exactly. It was Australian and super weird.
Absolutely beautiful, though.
Yeah, yeah. Like it will break your heart, but also the first season's a little rough, but you have to watch it. So good luck.
It's fine. It's like that perfect level of early 2000s campy, you know?
Hmm. Exactly. It like ramps up into the story. So it's not like boom, boom.
You have a couple campy moments in this, in Fiasco too, which I love so much. And one of them is um, Temper is taking a boat ride, like a physical boat on water, and she gets violently ill. She's just
Hmm.
like so seasick, which is funny to me because she's like a ship captain, but in space.
Hmm.
So I love these little like campy moments that you throw in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I Fiasco especially, I was looking for opportunities to find the humor in moments. Also, when you know, let's say Sin's humor is a little different than Temper's. Like Temper's very brash, like how do you like it? And Sin's got some of that, but I think Sin's book had a little bit more situational humor than Temper's book did, just because I was trying to keep the tone similar, but allow the narrators their slightly different voice. So there were a few more kind of slapsticky, campy, situational moments in Fiasco, even than Calamity.
They never felt out of place, and in fact, I think they helped with the tone range because there's a pretty dark thread throughout.
Hmm.
Um, And I think these moments of levity really help sell, like, these people are all pretty messed up and they find dark humor in things. And I feel like that's just how you got to cope.
It is. It is. That's, I always kind of wonder at the shows that categorize themselves as like drama or comedy, and it's, that's fine, but real life really is a mixture of both. That even in the most terrible moments, there's usually spots of levity, and in the funniest moments, there's often bits of, darkness. And so I do like to blend them together as much as I'm able.
You did really well. And it's not always easy to add a funny moment. So good job. Um, one of the other things is you started a little thread with Sin's neighbor at the very beginning of Fiasco. Does she play more of a part in any of the or in Chaos?
No, she gets her sort of exciting ending at the end of
Yeah.
Fiasco. Um, but she's not part of Chaos. I would love to do like a novella just of
Mhm.
Madrigal, because I love her as a character, and I mean she's got stuff to do, She's a boss lady that's maybe not voluntarily retired from bossing and would like to get back to it. And so I would love to return to her, but she's not part of Chaos.
Okay. And Chaos focuses on another woman from the Calamity crew. Um, and she is a mercenary priestess. Is that the one?
No,
Oh,
no.
dang
It
it.
focuses on Caro, who's the ship's
Oh,
engineer.
yes. Um, can you give a little tiny just elevator pitch of what Chaos is?
All right. Chaos, I'll do the same sort of short sentence,
Yeah.
longer one. I'm less prepared for this one because I've given it fewer times.
Oh, it's
Uh,
okay.
the chaos pitch would be a a woman trying to prove herself finds herself in way over her head. The much longer one is Caro ends up going into a prison to help some people that the crew has worked with before. They're mentioned in the previous books, named Victor and Victory. They're mercenary twins. She goes into a prison because they were working with their former captain then, and he calls her saying like, I haven't heard from him, there's a crisis. So she goes in to rescue them, finds out that Pierce has been doing some things that the Pierce family would do, that aren't great, and ends up being trapped in this luxury prison for the very, very rich. So the prison is like spa treatments and mani-pedis, but also gladiatorial cage battles. And she ends up forming a connection with one of the prison's champions, named Leviathan.
All right, so I'll read it right now. Are you working on anything beyond the Uncharted Hearts books?
So right now I'm actively working on that fourth one.
Yeah.
So it will be written and it will probably come out in some variation. But I'm also brainstorming what comes next. So what comes next will be outside of the Uncharted Heart series. But I'm not really ready to talk about it yet, but I think it will be sci-fi still with romance, closely linked.
So one of the things that I always find interesting about sci-fi, well, really just the romance genre is it awkward the first time somebody has to read your sex scenes?
The only my my parents read it pretty early. They read
Okay.
it before the publishers even, I think. They read it at the agent stage. And that was it wasn't bad, honestly. I just sort of gave them the book, wiped it from my mind, and went about my day. And I they came back and they were largely positive. My mother had always joked, and I put the caveat that this was always a joke, but she had always joked because what I wrote before this was generally only fantasy or only sci-fi, but it maybe had like a romance in it, but it wasn't the full romance experience with, thrusting and whatnot. And she always told me, she's like, you should write some smut. That's what really sells. And I was like, I took your advice, Mom. This is you. This is what you told me to do. And so, no, it was fun and funny. And it wasn't that, but mine don't get particularly salacious. You know,
Yeah.
they are sex and but it's not, we're not going too far to the boundaries of kink or anything like that, so it's not something that would be particularly, shocking, I don't think, to parents.
I'm hoping that since romance has blown up so much with like TikTok and all of these people finding books again,
Hmm.
that we get a little bit less prudish in the US. That'd be
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's really, it's something that not everyone, but a large percent of the population partakes in. And, that can't just be for baby creation. And at the end, everyone's like, well, that stunk. At least I'll have a kid out of it. Hopefully we're not doing it that way. So I agree. I think that we spend a lot of time in entertainment on things that are kind of the worst part of humanity, we on violence and crime and all that sort of thing. And it would be nice to focus on some of the things that are some of the best, some of the perks of humanity, some of the better parts.
I do think that sci-fi romance in particular is usually where I go to when I'm a little bit depressed and I just want to see hope. And
Hmm.
like it's usually a very bleak future, but then there are these moments of like very true, like warm people.
Hmm.
And I don't usually find it's the case like that in every other genre, but usually sci-fi romance.
I think so. I think that there are more sci-fi romances out there than people think there are, but there still aren't, as many as some of the other sub-genres of romance. And so I think that because of that, they have maybe a little bit more cohesive voice for that than, if you look at romantasy and there's just so much out there. And you look at like uh I've completely forgot the name, but like historical romance. And there's just a ton. So a lot of the subgroups are so large that there might be an overarching thing about them, but they tend to have differentiated in different areas. Whereas I think with sci-fi, because we are sort of a smaller family, that you do have kind of things that you can expect, that are specific to it, but that aren't specific to it being sci-fi. It's not like you can expect pew pew blaster fights, but the nature of a crew is that you get that found family element. The nature of the crew is that even if it's a crew that kind of hates each other, that they eventually kind of grow in that direction and the bonds form, which I think is one of the fantastic parts about it, that those other genres don't come with the built-in crew that most sci-fi does.
So I think when the crew goes awry and they all hate each other, that's when it becomes sci-fi horror. Um,
Yes.
and I'm just waiting for the murders.
Exactly, exactly. Or you can have, the mixture where it's like it starts out with everyone hating each other, but then they form. But yeah, if they start out tight and then they deviate, then yeah, there's going to be, either some sort of like creepy alien on the ship that's taking them out one by one and their infighting gets in the way, or there's going to be their own, damage. Well, hey, Battlestar Galactica.
Yes. Turns out everybody's awful.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a great time chatting with you.
It's been a real pleasure.
One of the last thing, do you have a local bookstore where you send out signed copies or anything?
Yeah, we're not actively doing a campaign right
Mhm.
now, but around the time of book releases, I usually work with Tattered Cover, which is the local bookstore here in Denver. And we do signed pre-orders of that book. And usually, the pre-orders of that book are a little bit more straightforward. It's sort of a whole
Yeah.
convoluted process, but at that time, anyone can call in for signed copies of the previous books as well. I also do a fair amount of traveling, and so if I am in different regions, I pop into bookstores and sign things. So, mostly in the like California, Colorado, Arizona, like mostly in the Southwest, but I pop into other states periodically and give things a sign. So there might be signed copies floating around in other places.
Perfect. I always love finding the signed copies and like supporting local bookstores. So
Hmm.
I try and ask if I remember.
Yeah, and every once in a while, for everyone out there, they like misplace a signed sticker or something, and there's just a book on the shelf that is signed that's not labeled that it's signed. So, go if you have a favorite author and there's a couple of their books on the shelf, just like take a look at a couple, just see if there's secret signed inside. Because I've noticed that a couple times I've like gone back to a bookstore and I said, "Oh, they have a bunch more of my books." And I'm like, "Oh, two of these were pre-signed. They just didn't get a sticker on them."
That's wonderful. A nice little hidden Easter egg.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, thank you again so much for chatting with me.
It's been great. I'm glad we could meet up this time.
Again, Chaos should be out March 11th, 2025. So fingers crossed it stays that date and it doesn't move. Yeah. So thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great day.